Okay, people will start filtering in. All right, welcome to the people who have joined us. We just switched on to broadcast mode, so I'll just wait a minute or so for some of the other people to join. That shouldn't take too long. We'll kick off in a minute or so. Yep, and just to let you know in the meantime, at the bottom of your screen, you've got a Q&A section and a chat section. So if you'd like to ask a question of either myself or Scott, please feel free to ask a question there. The Q&A also has an anonymous flag, so if you don't want to let people know who the question came from, please feel free to tick that. Also, if you're having any other technical issues, just ask in chat. So I'll be moderating the chat and the question and answer while Scott is presenting, just to keep things running smoothly. So yeah, and so we've got another one of these tomorrow and then more of these next week. And at the start of next week, we'll be announcing the next series of these to go into June. So we hope we can keep you amused and somewhat educated while you're all in lockdown. And you can make use of your time. Hopefully we'll provide you with some valuable information. Just wait a little bit longer. There's a couple of other registrants who are still yet to come in. All right, that seems to be most of the people. So I'll now hand you all over to Scott, who's one of our risk consultants here, for his webinar on safety as a profit strategy for transport. Take it away, Scott.
All right, thanks very much, Owen, and welcome everybody. I'll be talking today about safety as a profit strategy, specifically for the transport industry. As Owen said, I'm one of the risk consultants here with DriveRisk Australia. Owen is one of our directors here. You're welcome to ask any questions on the way through. There's the Q&A and the chat buttons down the bottom of the screen. Even as Owen said, even anonymously if you prefer. I do have some reference points as my sources of data throughout the presentation, and they're listed on the bottom of the screen if you wanted to check that yourself. So I think most people are logged in. Let's get underway. I'll turn my video off so I don't distract you, and we'll move forward. I may pause to have a glass of water as I go through. So yeah, please excuse me if that's the case. So look, I'll give you a bit of background about DriveRisk Australia if you don't know who our business is. We've been in business for over 20 years now. We specialise in lowering collision frequencies and costs, obviously, for our customers. We risk assess every single trip for our customers. When or if any risks are identified, we then help our customers to mitigate against these risks so they no longer occur. As you can see there, we're exclusive agents in the Southern Hemisphere for the Lytx DriveCam safety program. We're about 150 staff in total. I've been in the transport industry for about 10 years now. 8 of those, I was the Queensland State Manager for Teletrack Navman. Owen has been in the game for 10 years as well, although all of his time is with DriveRisk Australia. So, look, to give a bit of context in terms of the freight industry, I've got some numbers on the screen there. Look, for the purposes of today's conversation, I'll be focusing on rigids and articulated trucks. Articulated trucks are semis, B&A doubles, and rigid includes things like truck and dogs. I did leave those light commercial vehicle numbers in there because I was impressed by how many there are, 3.1 million, and also a bit of context as to the average kilometres that each of those vehicle types travel. Interestingly, some researchers told us, and you guys will know this, that between 2010 and 2030, we're expected to get a 50% growth in freight traffic. Now, obviously, we're obviously halfway through that, but that's also going to mean either bigger trucks or more trucks or both of those. So that obviously will increase our risk exposure on the road for those transport businesses. All right, and further down the context angle, road accidents in Australia. This is a 2017 report from the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development and Cities. As I said, in 2017, that $27 billion number is obviously a very, very large number. Being a government study, though, it does include things like lost future income from fatalities, as well as things like the cost of hospital care for serious injuries as well. And it also includes light passenger vehicle incidents as well, with a couple of those other metrics like lost future income from fatalities, etc. Nevertheless, I'll delve a bit further in the presentation with those numbers relative to the heavy vehicle transport industry specifically. But in terms of, from this report, the root causes of incidents, they've noted about 7% of all the incidents are due to poor vehicle maintenance or vehicle faults. Now, poor vehicle maintenance is things like obviously brakes not working or brake lights not working, bald tyres, wheels out of alignment, and suspension not quite working well as well. Following on with about 10% of all road incidents are caused apparently by poor road conditions. These are things like flooded roads, barriers or rail crossings are out, and things like potholes as well. However, unfortunately, the vast majority of all road incidents are caused by human error or poor driving decisions. So, look, we've obviously got control over the vehicle maintenance. We've obviously got control over our driving decisions, and so we can confidently say that 90% of all road incidents are actually avoidable if the vehicles are properly maintained and we make the right driving decisions. So, on a bit of a sadder note, I'll look at the worst side of road incidents, and that's the fatalities. So this is another government department study, the Bureau of Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Economics, and they did a study in 2019, and unfortunately they noted 189 fatal crashes involving heavy vehicles, resulting in just over 200 people dying from heavy vehicles. Unfortunately, both the fatality numbers and the incident numbers are up. And obviously, as you can see on the screen there, fatalities involving heavy rigids are up nearly a third, or just over a third, from 2018. Look, in another research paper on hospitalisations and the reasons people go to hospital, that report from the Australian Institute of Health and Wellbeing in 2016-17 financial year noted 752 freight vehicle incidents resulted in hospitalisation. So fatalities and hospitalisations, these are what we call major incidents or major collisions. Just note as well the trend lines there for the last 10 or so years. Rigid truck trend lines are slowly trending up. Now, I suspect, it's just a guess, but I suspect that this is due to increased exposure from that demand growth that we saw on the earlier slide. It's also quite a bit easier to get a license to drive a rigid as opposed to getting a license to drive an articulated truck. And with articulated truck fatalities, trending down as well, that's quite a significant trend down. Look, again, this is a suspicion on my part, but I suspect it's due to those types of trucks having better, just simply being safer. So things like ADAS systems, emergency autonomous braking, smart cruise control and lane keeping assist and that type of thing as well. There's also been quite a big focus in the last 4 or 5 years or so on fatigue detection technologies, and they're more prevalent in the articulated trucks as well. So, look, also as part of my research, I looked at the the NTI's National Truck Accident Research Centre paper. This is from 2017 data. They were actually scheduled early this year to release the 2019 data, but unfortunately coronavirus has thrown a spanner in that works like it's done for most of us. Nevertheless, in their 2017 report, they noted that research paper is about their major incidents. Major for them is incidents that cost over $50,000. And they had 756 claims across their customer base. Interestingly, or not interestingly, they've got the same trend lines in that rigids are trending up and articulated trucks are trending down as well. Look, those are majors and fatalities and hospitalisations. I couldn't find any information anywhere about minor collision frequencies and costs. It just doesn't seem to be reported anywhere at all. So getting back onto that, so just on that minor collision data, there is some research from this fellow here in the 1930s, Herbert William Heinrich. His pyramid's quite well known in safety circles, and it's an analysis on the root causes of incidents. This was done in the 1930s in the USA, and his research paper, which has been confirmed many times since, says that for every major incident, your business is likely to have about 29 minor incidents and around about 300 near misses, we could call them. No damage, risky incidents. You just nearly hit somebody or hit something. So, given those ratios, we can extrapolate the 2019 major fatalities and collision data into a pyramid that looks like this. So 941, that's the fatalities and the hospitalisation incidents of 2019. Just over 27,000 minor dings and scrapes. Remembering there's about 600,000 heavy vehicles on the road. That means that there's a minor incident, there's 75 minor incidents every single day. And 2.5 major incidents every single day here in Australia. And the near misses, based on Heinrich's ratio, just over 282,000 near misses by heavy vehicles on Australian roads in 2019. So those some very sobering numbers, and you could work out how likely between the 600,000 vehicles, your businesses is likely to have majors and minors from that pyramid. So look, in terms of the costs and the consequences of collisions in heavy vehicles or freight vehicles, this 2016 report from, I can't remember which government department it is, but an inquiry into the costs of road crashes to Australia, they noted an average just vehicle repair costs for rigids of $15,000 and just under 40 grand for an articulated truck. So those are just vehicle repair costs, and it doesn't differentiate the report between major repair costs and minors. So look, that's just an average, as you can see. And look, that excludes things like lost or damaged goods from the incident, lost revenue and productivity from vehicle and staff downtime whilst they're being repaired or recovering in hospital or just at home. And obviously, it's virtually impossible to calculate the impact insurance in collisions have to your insurance in premiums and excesses and what. So, in terms of calculating the costs for your own business, how can you do that? Look, most businesses quite well understand hard costs, direct costs. So these are things like vehicle repair costs, downtime and lost revenue, staff being off the road and unavailable to work, workers' compensation costs, the time it takes to rearrange deliveries and pickups, the time it takes to investigate incidents, because you've got to complete paperwork, you've got to investigate them, and obviously the time to complete the paperwork as well. And I mentioned before, insurance premium increases, on the next year. And there's also things like, third-party claims. Your truck hit my car, or your truck spat up a stone and broke my windscreen. Our customers complain about that in that scenario very, very often. Those are the direct costs or hard costs. Businesses can quite easily calculate what these are. There are, obviously some indirect costs as well, and these are a little bit more difficult to quantify. However, are very, very real and usually are far, far more costly in the long run. So, as you can see there, your brand reputation. No one would like to see your truck with your logo on the side of the truck on the news. How that impacts your reputation, driver retention and attraction rates. If you've got a reputation of having collisions, it might be more difficult to attract drivers, particularly good drivers. And obviously not to mention the impact to the driver's family as well if they're involved in a major incident or even a minor one and they're out of work for a week or a few days. Pretty common complaint from our customers when they come to us is that quite often their workshops are just overrun with repair work rather than scheduled maintenance. And sometimes scheduled maintenance takes a back seat because the vehicles need to be repaired to get them on the road so that they earn money for the business. So there are two sides to calculating the costs of collisions within your own business. So the flip side of course is to simply not have road incidents. And as you can see on the screen there's some very clear and obvious benefits to not having road incidents. Increased productivity, fewer injuries, lower insurance premiums as well. These benefits go directly to the bottom line. It's not like you're investing money to get a better road safety record. These goes directly off your bottom line because it's a direct cost off your bottom line when you have collisions. And similarly with those indirect benefits as well. Obviously, it's the inverse of the consequences of having vehicle incidences as well. So all of these benefits, they contribute to the culture of a business, and that's what our company does for our customers. Is we help them improve their safety culture through improving their on-road safety record. And as we all know, culture comes from senior management. So, if you want to go down the path of improving your on-road safety record, you must have senior management on board because they create the culture, and they will help focus the business on safety as well. If any benefits are going to be achieved. So, look, what I'll do now is I'll look at a specific hypothetical example of calculating the costs of collisions. And I've got a hypothetical business here, 50 vehicles, mostly metro deliveries, mostly rigids, a few articulated trucks, the insurance costs and the revenue costs. And in this hypothetical example, let's assume they're having about 2 minor incidents per month, an average repair cost of $3,000. It takes about half a day for the vehicles to be repaired, so they're off the road. And half of those incidents are put through insurance and half of them are not, because sometimes it'll be $1,000 or $500 to get the vehicle repaired. Sometimes it'll be $5,000, which is where that average $3,000 repair cost comes in. In terms of majors, let's assume in this hypothetical example that they're having 3 major incidents a year. With an average repair cost of $15,500. It takes 2 weeks for the vehicle to be repaired, and everything is put through insurance because of those costs. So, I'll just elaborate a little bit on that 4 hours incident investigation part. So, incident investigation means visiting the scene of the accident, reviewing any GPS data that you may have, reviewing any dash cam footage if you've got that and if it actually works, and completing all the incident and insurance paperwork. So that's the sort of, on average, it's a 4-hour time period to do all of that. Driving to the site, completing the paperwork, searching through dash cam footage, finding the right, 5 minutes of footage, and hopefully it works. So that's what our customers tell us, about 4 hours per incident. So when we look at the actual dollar figures for that hypothetical example, we see that for the 24 minor incidents per year, you can see the costs on the screen there. $36,000 in repair costs because half of them are put through insurance and half of them are not. The excess is 24 grand. Excuse me. The time to investigate incidents and the lost productivity of your operations manager to do that. And because the vehicles are off the road, whether it goes through insurance or not, 18 grand in lost revenue. That's because they're earning $1,500 a day and half a day off the road each. In terms of their majors, 6 grand, everything goes through insurance, 6 grand in excess. There's no vehicle repair costs because everything goes through insurance. The insurance company pays for that. There's only 3 incidents, so investigation times are not very much, but lost revenue because 3 vehicles are off the road for 2 weeks each and $1,500 per day in revenue. So when you add all of that up, these 24 minor incidents and 3 majors per year are costing this hypothetical business 82 grand in minor collision costs and 52 grand in, 52 and a half in major collision costs, and plus whatever it is on lost freight if the vehicle's completely written off. That adds up to $135,000, which is a pure cost to the business, and not to mention how that impacts on your insurance premiums next year as well. So, look, I've had a question come in with regards to vehicle repairs. What happens if we were to do those repair costs, those repairs at the same time as the scheduled maintenance? So that's a very good question. Look, the vehicle still needs to be repaired. You won't be able to squeeze in, all the vehicle repairs into the allotted time by your workshop for the scheduled maintenance. So the time that the vehicles are off the road is still going to be necessary. It'll just mean that you get the vehicle off the road once rather than twice. However, the time to repair the vehicle, the lost revenue is still all exactly the same. So I hope that answers that question. So look, what can be actually done about these minor collisions? So imagine for a moment in this hypothetical example, we could halve these incidents and therefore costs. So you'd go from 135 grand a year in collision repair costs to $67,000 a year in repair costs. So that's 1 minor a month, 1.5 majors a year. Obviously the frequencies are halved and therefore the costs as well. So if there was some way you could do that, what could you do with an extra $6,000 to $8,000 on your bottom line? That sounds like another dispatch member or another truck driver that the business can afford. So obviously, how can you do this? Remembering that 83% of all vehicle incidents are due to poor driving decisions. The very best way to lower collision frequencies is to train or coach the drivers to be better at the driving task. So there's things like training the drivers on situational awareness, being able to identify any poor driving habits or behaviours so that they can be changed. So when I say train or coach the drivers to be better at the driving task, I'm not talking about, we're specifically talking about habits and driving style and behaviours, not how to operate a vehicle. The licensing system does that. So behaviours like, persistent tailgating, for example, safe lane changes, having the appropriate speed around a roundabout, wearing seat belts, not playing on the phone. So in terms of coaching, the sporting world uses video very, very heavily to be able to help and train and coach their players. And we believe that video is fundamental to be able to understand the driver's current behaviours and styles and habits. With that football analogy, you'll find that your footy team will watch the weekend game probably 3 or 4 or 5 times to analyse their performance and obviously work on their weaknesses. And we believe that truck drivers should be exactly the same. And if you don't have video, unfortunately, you're relying on basically hearsay. Things like, oh, I got a call from someone on the Monash yesterday, and he said you were tailgating them for 5 minutes. Well, GPS data won't show you that, and who's going to look through, dash cam footage to try and find that and prove it? It's going to take time. It is a lot of hearsay. On GPS, you may get a harsh braking report from your GPS system. There's a blip on the report that said you had a harsh braking incident yesterday on Tamworth Road in St Kilda. It doesn't give you any context. And if you ever do actually go and speak to the driver about that, the more often than not, the response will be from the driver, oh yeah, but there was a dog on the road. I had to slam on the anchors, and so that's why there was sudden braking. It doesn't identify any behaviours or habits. So, and that's why we believe that video is fundamental to being able to understand drivers' habits and styles and behaviours. So with video, using that, like the sporting teams, they're reviewed, analyse your performance as well, discuss areas for improvement with the driver. If they've got a habit of not wearing a seatbelt or playing on the phone or tailgating, you need to talk to the driver about those things so that the driver understands that those things are not too kosher, as it were, and actually do something to change that habit. We also recommend with our customers to focus on 1 or 2 key behaviours until they are mastered, and then move on to some other, poor driving behaviours or habits. Rather than trying to do everything all at once, you'll get much quicker success if you focus on just 1 or 2 key behaviour for the driver. And like the sporting teams, monitor and review regularly, recognise and encourage improvements. People, they respond to reward and recognition, and recognise the good things that the drivers are doing. It's a much quicker way to get the right attitude and focus from the driver if they've got some good things that you highlight and a few bit of constructive criticisms that that need a bit of focus and attention. And then just repeat the whole process. So I'll just take a glass of water. So coaching or training the drivers have what's commonly known as the halo effect. So the halo effect is that other related but uncoached behaviours automatically improve because the driver is focused on, let's say, his tailgating, for example. So he's focused on his driving habits and his styles, and so he will automatically slow down at roundabouts, pay more attention to the speed limits, make sure the seatbelt is on. So that's what I mean by the halo effect. Even though you may have had a training session about tailgating, other unrelated and uncoached behaviours will automatically improve. So that means that collision costs, in fact, amongst our customer base, if our customers reduce their minor collision frequencies by half, by 50%, because of that halo effect, we often find that our customers get an 80%, a 70 or an 80% reduction in major incident frequencies. So all of a sudden, because of coaching, you go from 135 grand a year down to just over 50 grand a year. That's $80,000 and a 2.6 to 1 return on investment. Obviously, provided the costs to do the training and the coaching don't exceed your current losses, your 135 grand, it's money in the bank, basically. All right, so some of the other benefits of having fewer incidents we see because the drivers are more attentive to their driving habits and styles is Quite often we see better fuel economy, better tyre life because they're not going around roundabouts so harsh, so quickly, or driving over the roundabouts or the gutters of the roundabout. And obviously insurance premium discounts come through as well because you're having fewer incidents. Some of those intangibles, those indirect benefits like your brand and your reputation, you're able to keep and win more contracts because you've got a great safety record and a great reputation. And valued by your customers because you deliver on time every single time. The vehicles are not off the road for repair, and they're not off the road, because there's been an incident. Now, look, obviously, our trucks are not the only vehicles on the road. There are obviously third-party incidences that are caused by other trucks and other vehicles on the road, and they're what we call accidents as opposed to incidents. Incidents we've got some control over. Which is why you do incident reporting rather than accident reporting within your business today. So, once these indirect benefits are accounted for, we often see amongst our customers a 4 or a 5 or a 6 to 1 return in investment when all of these things are taken into consideration. So, how can you effectively, coach your drivers and achieve these types of benefits? Well, quite a few trucking businesses or transport businesses look at driver trainers. So, one of the biggest challenges that driver trainers have is the fact that once the trainer is in the truck teaching somebody under instruction, the driver being instructed is on his best behaviour, and consequently very few faults are actually found. So that's a big challenge. It's also quite impractical to have a driver trainer in every single vehicle every single day. That's simply cost prohibitive. Look, you can look at things like dash cams as well, but unfortunately, no one's got time to review 10 hours of driving amongst your 50 odd vehicles or however many you've got to try to find some habits and behaviours and your near misses. You obviously get with dash cams recording of the collisions and the incidents. And, if you happen to have a dash cam system that looks at the driver, you might be able to see what he was doing or not doing at the time. But the dash cams are really only good for reviewing collisions. They don't actually prevent incidents because no one's got time to look at 10 hours of driving video across your entire fleet. Look, you can look at things like GPS reporting, harsh driving reporting. Unfortunately, though, as I mentioned earlier, a harsh braking or a harsh cornering report on a GPS system provides no context. It doesn't tell you, why these incidents occurred. It's just the fact that a harsh braking event occurred on Smith Street, Ashfield yesterday. You've got to go and talk to the driver if you really, really want to find out what happened, and the driver will tell you whatever it is he thinks is going to get him out of trouble, unfortunately. And so GPS harsh driving reports are really a bit of a furphy, really, when it comes to safety. Like I said, it provides no context, and you've got to speak to the driver about what happened. Look, another solution is, of course, DriveCam, the solution that we provide. And I mentioned at the start of the presentation that we risk assess every single video, every single trip, and recommend a targeted and focused coaching program where or if it's necessary. Driver trainers absolutely love our DriveCam program because it enables their efforts to be focused and targeted. They might spend 3 weeks with a driver rather than half an hour with all drivers, and they'll get much, much better successes by having that focused and targeted driver training once risks have been identified. So, look, that's all I wanted to go through today in terms of safety as a profit strategy. I hope that was informative and educational. I'll open the lines up for any questions if any have come through. I will email this presentation to everyone who's registered. Look, thanks very much for dialing in and taking the time out of your day. We've got more webinars coming on tomorrow and next week. Owen, have we got any questions?
Yes, we do, Scott. Thanks for that. So there are a couple of questions. So one is, I've got a lot of different types of trucks in my fleet. How does that affect this calculation you do?
Yeah. So in terms of working out calculations based on different trucks, it's simply a matter of understanding, the average repair costs and how much revenue each of those trucks deliver on a daily basis. And rather than having, one calculator for a fleet of 50 vehicles, you might have three, one for each vehicle type. We do actually have a return on investment calculator that I can send out. So reach out to me on email or phone and I can send that to you. It's quite a simple, easy to use calculator, and that'll give you an idea of what your collision costs are today per vehicle type. So I hope that's answered that question.
Yep. So there's a couple others all around the costs or the calculation, Scott. Is we don't have complicated office systems. So how do I get the data for feeding these calculations?
Yeah. So look, you'll need to. You must be able to figure out, hopefully, how much your repair bills are for the collisions that you are actually having. And obviously, things like the wages of the operations manager for the incident investigation times, and in terms of revenue per vehicle per day, just divide the revenue by how many trucks you got and by how many days you operate, and that should give you that type of a number. Again, look, we're very, very familiar with these ROI calculations, and again, please reach out to me on email or by mobile phone, and I can talk to you about that offline on a more specific basis if you wish.
Yeah, and there's one around the indirect costs. So they're not included in those calculations you've done. So what do you do with that information?
Yeah, so obviously indirect costs are different for every business, and they are very, very difficult to calculate. How do you calculate the value of your brand in the marketplace? How do you calculate the value of your ability to attract and win drivers and also contracts? Look, honestly, it's almost impossible to give you a dollar figure on those indirect costs. And nevertheless, they are there, honestly, we haven't done an indirect calculator for any of our customers purely because it is quite difficult. And it's simply a matter of thinking about those types of indirect things when collisions do occur. So yeah, I can't give you a dollar figure on how to work that out because it's simply very, very difficult. Again, how do you calculate the value of your brand in the marketplace? So,
and one in a bit of a different vein, Scott, is the drive cam is putting a camera in the truck. Are there any privacy concerns surrounding that?
Not at all. Not at all. So the vehicles are generally owned by the company. It is honestly no different to having a CCTV system in your warehouse or your loading area or in the office area. In terms of privacy, businesses are allowed to monitor and ensure the safety of their staff in the workplace. A truck is a workplace. You may have a few policy things to sort out with regards to vehicles that drivers are allowed to take home for the weekend and after hours. We help our customers redesign their policies around those types of things because it does occur. But in terms of on the breaks and during, well, it's not on the breaks, but during working hours, you're quite within your right to monitor and ensure the safety of your staff. So yeah, I hope that's answered that question.
Yeah, I hope so, Scott. And so another question was, how does this safer driving improve my fuel burn?
Well, because the drivers are generally more attentive to how they're operating the vehicle in terms of not jumping on the brakes all of a sudden and not jumping on the accelerators when the lights go green. And that's how we get a better fuel burn from more conservative driving. Yeah, so we do generally see between a 3 and an 8% improvement in fuel consumption, because the drivers are just simply more conservative in their attitude to driving on the road. Yeah, so that's how that fuel burn and fuel consumption calculator works. Unless you're really already focused on the fuel consumption through maybe some sort of a GPS system. Some GPS systems plug into the engines of trucks these days, and you can get all the RPM data and that sort of thing. If you're really focused on that, then DriveCam won't give you any fuel consumption benefits. But if you don't look at those types of things, and we teach the drivers to be more conservative and safe on the road, then you will get some minor fuel consumption benefits.
All right, thanks, Scott. And yeah, that's about the end of the questions at this point. So I'd just like to thank everybody for attending, and thank Scott for his presentation today. Just remind everybody that there are further webinars coming up, so please check our LinkedIn page or our website for further places to register and see what other educational material we can provide you. Thank you very much, Scott.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks again for dialing in.